there, Refuge Church. It's great to be with you as we continue working through the flood story together. We are in Genesis chapter 8, so I'm going to pray and kick us off. Lord God, King of the universe, I pray that you would be with us this morning or afternoon or evening or wherever we find this video, Lord. I just ask that you would minister to us and that the word that is in here for us, the life-giving meat of this text would not go unnoticed by our souls, but that you would harness it to make a real impact on who we are and our growing to be like you and our transformation into wholeness and flourishing in everything that you have designed for us. I ask that you would be with me, that my words would be helpful and clear and a blessing and service to your people. I ask all of these things in your name, Jesus. Amen. All right, here we go. Genesis chapter 8. God remembered Noah and every living thing and all the silent animals that were with him in the box. God caused a spirit to cross over the land, and the waters were soothed. The eye of the deep and the lattice work of heaven were stopped up, and the rain from heaven was held back. The waters returned from the land, went and returned. The waters diminished after the end of 150 days. The box set down in the seventh month on the 17th day of the month upon the mountains of Urartu. The waters went and decreased until the 10th month, and the 10th month and the first month the heads of the mountains were seen. At the end of 40 days, Noah opened the window of the box which he had made. He sent a raven, and it exited, going out and returning until the waters dried from upon the land. He sent out the dove from himself to see if the waters had been cursed from upon the face of the ground. Interesting. The dove found no place to rest for the sole of her foot. She returned to him in the box, for the waters were upon the face of the whole earth. He sent out his hand and took her and brought her to himself in the box. He twisted around another 7 days after and again sent the dove from the box. The dove came to him at sundown, and look, an olive leaf plucked in her mouth. Noah knew that the waters had been cursed from upon the land. He twisted around again another 7 days and sent the dove. She did not return to him again. In the 601st year, in the first month, in the first day of the month, the waters dried from upon the land. Noah took off the covering of the ark and looked. Dry was the face of the ground. In the second month, on the 27th day of the month, the earth was dry. God spoke to Noah to say, "Exit from the box, you and your woman and your sons and the women of your sons with you. Every living thing that is with you, from all the flesh of the birds and all the silent ones and every gliding thing that glides upon the land, bring out with you, that they may swarm in the land and bear fruit and become many upon the land." Noah exited, and his sons and his woman and the woman of his sons with him, every living thing, every gliding thing, and every bird, whatever glides upon the land, according to their families, exited the box. Noah built a place of slaughter to Yahweh, and took from every clean silent one and from every clean bird, and set them up in the place of slaughter. Yahweh smelled the smell of Noah, and Yahweh said in his heart, "Not again will I curse any more the ground because of humanity, for the squeezed shape of the heart of humanity is evil from his adolescence. Nor will I again strike all of life as I have done until all the days of the land, seedtime and harvest and cold and heat and summer and winter and day and night, they shall not Shabbat." Okay, so a whole bunch of things here that we're going to talk about. There's too much to cover, so we're just going to make space for a couple notes, just as God makes space for us. But first, we've been going through the Epic of Gilgamesh together as part of the our study of this flood story. One of the videos I accidentally called it the Enuma Elish instead of the Epic of Gilgamesh. I apologize. This whole time we've been reading together from the Epic of Gilgamesh. So I'm going to read that now for comparison because we've been noticing some similarities and some differences. Okay, so this is the Epic of Gilgamesh. For 6 days and 6 nights the wind blew, torrent and tempest and flood overwhelmed world. Tempest and flood raged together like warring hosts. When the seventh day dawned, the storm from the south subsided, the sea grew calm, and the flood was stilled. I looked at the face of the world, and there was silence. All mankind was turned to clay. The surface of the sea stretched as flat as a rooftop. I opened a hatch, and the light fell on my face. I bowed low, I sat down, and I wept. The tears streamed down my face, for on every side was the waste of water. I looked for land in vain, but 14 leagues distant there appeared a mountain, and there the boat grounded. On the mountain of Nisir, the boat held fast. She held fast and did not budge. One day she held, and a second day on the mountain of Nisir she held fast and did not budge. A third day and a fourth day she held fast on the mountain, did not budge. A fifth day and a sixth day she held fast on the mountain. When the seventh day dawned, I loosed a dove and let her go. She flew away, but finding no resting place, she returned. Then I loosed a swallow, and she flew away, but finding no resting place, she returned. I loosed a raven, and she saw that the waters had retreated. She ate, she flew around, she cawed, and she did not come back. Then I threw everything open to the four winds. I made a sacrifice and poured out a libation on the mountaintop. 7 and again 7 cauldrons I set up on their stands. I heaped wood and cane and cedar and myrtle. When the gods smelled the sweet savor, they gathered like flies over the sacrifice. Ugh, what a great line. Okay, so we can see a lot of similarities here, right? We've got a long time described about how everything's just a waste of water, a long time of the protagonist waiting, and then we've got 3 birds. You might notice, ding, 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 that it's reversed from the order of birds in Noah's story, and it includes a swallow. So we'll talk more about that in a minute. And then 7 cauldrons he sets up, and he heaps them up, and the gods smell them and gather like flies. So a lot of similarities here. This week we do have that one difference that we're going to talk about, being the birds, but otherwise we're mostly reading that to talk about, look at how similar these stories are, right? Okay. It also might answer some of our questions. Sometimes people talk about, well, why do the characters in Genesis start giving sacrifices before God has told them to? So here in this story, we see that it's culturally normative, and maybe it's mirroring these other stories, right, that the original recipients of the text would have known, which isn't to say it didn't happen. It's just another way of looking at things. All right. But so many little motifs to touch on here that are so beautiful. So the part here that we start off at the beginning of chapter 8, God caused a spirit to cross over the land and the waters were soothed. This reminds us of the creation story, right? When God's spirit is hovering like a dove, interesting, over the water. So again, we have this setup. The scene is set for a new creation to happen. And that can be a super helpful reminder for us. We're in March right now. Spring is on its way for us. And maybe we can lean into the fact that new creation happens all around us in cycles, year after year after year after year. Right now, there's snow outside of my window right now, but underneath all of that, things are starting to bed up with new life. And so sometimes the lie that we hear from ourselves, maybe the world, maybe other folks in our community, is that this is just the way we are now. If you feel disenfranchised, if you feel lost after deconstruction, if you feel like you're not moored in your faith tradition, or something unrelated to faith, just having a hard time in your mental, emotional, physical health, all sorts of other things, it can feel like this moment is going to last forever. However, just as in this story, where it seems like the flood is going to be here forever, the face of the ground has been cursed, right? Nothing is ever going to be the same again. Yet God's Spirit still moves, still causes new life. The dualism in this passage, right? The eye of the deep will be stopped up. And as we see this comfort in creation of spring will come again, spring will come again, spring will come again. So we might start looking for places in our life where spring might be showing up. So that's our first little note. Our second note is that God tells them to exit the ark. I'm not sure if these are super chronological. Yeah. Well, it's not chronological. I'm just kind of bopping through my favorites here. But so out of order, God tells them to get out of the ark. Last week, we talked a lot about building arks for ourselves to navigate the chaos, the tohu vavohu, the waters, the depths, the things that we feel like are difficult to survive, right? We talked about different arks and whether that's relationships or spiritual practices or community. We're invited to build these arks that we can enter into and find some sanctity and find some rest. What is challenging is that God, just as he told them to get in and shut the door behind them, made sure that they're safe, wrapped them up in his protection, he also tells them, get back out. So just like in Eden, it was not good for man to remain in this womb-like state forever. We are also supposed to get out of our arks. We're not supposed to live there full time, right? And for some of us, we feel like the things that we've experienced are so strong, and so we're just going to stay in our nice little hidey holes that we've built, and maybe we have big stacks of books around us that we feel like epitomize our new faith experience, or our podcasts, or our private media that we're consuming on our own, and we feel like I'm so safe down in my little badger's den that I've built. It's so cozy and nice. That's a little ark, and it's great that we have built those spaces to do our own wrestling and figuring out, and what do I think, and how do I process the story of my faith and my church experience. However, God also says to get out of the ark. There is a time to leave behind our stacks of books and to go out back into the larger community, the raw community, and start living life again, right? Even the monastics left their monasteries, right? They didn't stay there forever. They did healthcare missions and educational missions and exploratory missions and all these things that we tend to forget when we think about monastics. And so we can also receive that invitation, just as Noah and his family were brought forth from the ark, and no one was like, oh, I'll just like stay here and hold down the fort because like an ark person is just kind of who I am now. God says, nope, every person, every living being needs to get off the ark. So we can be challenged by that. Okay, going back in our order, we're going to talk about, well, no, we're not. We're going to end with the birds. So we're moving through technically. So this period at the end, it says Noah built a place of slaughter to Yahweh. That's a altar, by the way. It literally means place of slaughter. And he took from every clean and silent one and every clean bird and set them up in the place of slaughter. If you think about why is Noah doing this, set aside the cultural thing from the Epic of Gilgamesh, what's Noah's headspace like? He's getting out of the ark, and the first thing he does is set up an altar. There's two ways to look at this. One is more optimistic and one is more dark. But the more optimistic route is it's a new creation, it's a new spring. He's setting up his new year, his new life by starting off consecrating some things and setting them aside for God and spending some time in worship. That's very nice. That's a nice way to look at it, and it could be right. And I kind of hope for Noah's well-being that it's right. But the other way to look at this is that he's setting up this place of slaughter, and he's taking from every clean animal and every clean bird, and he's sending them up to God. That's a lot of animals. And we can kind of imagine Noah has some PTSD from seeing, humanity die and many, many animals die. And he's frustrated with the character of God. It says that he was just, and his ancestors walked with the Elohim, right? And so he knows something of God, and now God has gone and done this. Yes, in the midst of terrible violence. Yes, after waiting and striving with humanity for quite some time and putting up with so much violence, but he sees this and says, really, this is who you are? Is this dead body enough? Is this dead body enough? Is this dead body enough? As he goes through and kills animal after animal after animal. So then Yahweh responds. He shows up. Our God doesn't just leave him there to kill all the animals. He shows up and he comforts him by saying, never again am I going to curse the ground. And he says, for the squeezed shape of the heart of humanity is evil from his adolescence. So in Jewish tradition, we talk about the Yetzer Ra and the Yetzer Tov, and how we all have this inclination in our being toward selfishness and destruction, but we also have an inclination toward generosity and love. And so this is where they get that idea from, that inclination of the heart. But it's the squeezed shape calls back to the creation story and how God like carved us and formed us as a potter does, right? And so God here is recognizing and making room for us, that we're not perfect. We're not concretely set in one place. The fact that we have free will means that sometimes we choose the wrong thing and sometimes we choose the right thing. And here we see God making space for that. Which when we contrast that with sometimes the theology we've received about how God says, be perfect as I am perfect. Well, that's a bad translation, right? Go back to the Tamim series for more on what that word really says. But instead, seeing God's heart for us in the room that he creates for us. Proverbs says it is the glory of a person to overlook an offense, right? And the Bible doesn't command us to do things that God isn't capable of doing. And so here we see God's openness, his graciousness, his kindness, and understanding. I created these beings with free will, and sometimes they choose evil, especially from adolescence, which is kind of funny. And never again will he strike all of life as he has done. And he'll continue to provide for us without resting, which is very interesting. So we can recall when we are wondering whether God could possibly forgive us again, or when we are experiencing frustration in our beings for other people and their evil inclinations, as it's called in Jewish theology. Remember that to be like God and to put the character of God on display means creating space for people even when they make mistakes, and when they make mistakes maliciously, right? Sometimes we think, oh, I have all the room in the world for people when they just make an error. But if you go out of your way to, slight me, then it's all over. Nope. People are humans, and apparently humans have evil inclinations. And God has room for that. He creates a room for that and chooses not to follow and seek after retribution. And so can we. Okay, now to the birds. So in this Epic of Gilgamesh, it says a raven and then messed it up. Not helpful. It starts with a dove, then it goes to a swallow, and then it goes to a raven. Now, in the in Noah's story, in Bereshit, in Genesis, it just has a raven and then a dove multiple times, which is very interesting. So why? That feels pretty arbitrary to us, right? Okay, you sent out a bird to see if it'll land somewhere, and you tried one bird and it didn't work, and you tried another bird and it didn't work, and then you tried that bird again. What's going on here? Surely there is some deeper meaning, and this isn't just totally random. Why, yes. Indeed, there is. How exciting for us. So what's the deeper meaning of this reversal between the Epic of Gilgamesh? What's the symbolism behind some of these birds? What might they be talking about? Okay, so if you know anything about ravens, first off, I'm sure there's a million fascinating YouTube videos about ravens. because they are fascinating beings. They're incredibly smart, right? We've all heard about them solving puzzles and knowing people and all these kind of creepy things that displace our ideas about what it means to be an animal versus a human, right? If you grew up with that dichotomy being presented. They're fascinatingly smart, and they're also carrion creatures. And so the Christian early commentators say, like, it came back because it was eating the dead bodies that were around the ark, which doesn't really make sense because the dead bodies would have been everywhere, but whatever. There's some racism in there too, as there often is. But okay, and then the Midrash, interestingly, say that the raven stayed close to the ark and didn't go find a new place to live because it didn't trust Noach, and it thought that Noach was going to try to mate with its mate, and so it had this like battle of the wits type situation. But the point of that midrash, which yes is pretty weird, is that the raven wasn't capable or wasn't open to trusting. It takes trust to go out into this new world. Okay, so I like that. I like that teaching, but what more could there be? So the word for raven in Hebrew is orev. Orev. The word for evening, in which darkness is coming, is erev. Super close. It's the same root, orev and erev. Hopefully you can hear it's pretty much the same thing. But so that kind of cracks open our door. Okay, if this bird could be a metaphor for darkness, if this bird could be a metaphor for growing dark, right? Erev has to do with the mixed time where the light is ebbing away and the darkness is coming in. So it's not just darkness, it's specifically growing darkness. Then what could the possible contrast be with the dove, and why might they be flipped in the Sumerian version versus the biblical version? Okay, so the word dove is Yonah, just like Jonah, the name of the prophet. That's a whole other teaching. And it's taken from the word for wine, yain. And that has to do with it bubbling. So if you think about doves talking like coo, coo thing, it you might be able to poetically imagine the link there. But wine always represent joy and community, also sexual promiscuity in the ancient world. But joy and community for us, we think of the Holy Spirit, right? Which is because of Genesis 1, but also Jesus's story. But that's kind of a transposition. That was supposed to be calling back to this story, not vice versa. So put this all together for me, Pastor Elle. What's this supposed to mean? So in this reversal that we have between the Sumerian version and the biblical version, in the Sumerian version, which if you recall is darker, we have deceit, we have lying to the rest of the people who are going to die, we have the gods fighting it out, which we'll see more in next week's sermon. But in this version, they're talking about, okay, in this new creation, in this whole new world, what kind of method is going to prevail? What is the value that is able to go out and build a new home in this new world? And in the Sumerian version, it is the dove, right? About joy and community and celebration and freedom and being able to relax, right? Those are the things we think about wine. That is what isn't going to be able to make a new home. A swallow goes out. That's a whole nother teaching that I think we talked about in the Consider the Birds part of the Kingdom of God series in the Beatitudes. Not the Beatitudes, the Sermon on the Mount. But even more than that, the animal that is able to make out, the guiding force that's presented in the Epic of Gilgamesh of the way that we should live our lives in this new world, is to live like the raven, eating, not so much probably eating dead stuff, but specifically, you have to use your wiles. You have to use your smarts. Yes, you might be on your own and kind of a loner, but if you keep an eye out like the raven does and you solve your problems like a raven does by yourself, you can figure out the way. And in the biblical story, God takes that expectation and flips it on its head and says, you think that in the raven eat carrion world before, now that there's this new creation, that's going to be the way we continue to walk out life? No, that led to violence before. The way in this new creation, God says, that we are able to build a new home, build a new habitation, is the way of the dove, the way of wine, the way of joy and community and freedom. You'll notice, by the way, in the story, it doesn't work the first time. Peace, community, joy doesn't instantly break out the second we summon it. Sometimes it takes multiple trips to be able to establish that in the land. And what does the raven bring back in her mouth? But an olive branch, which for us, again, because of the story, we have trouble because we interpolate all of our symbolism onto the story when really our symbolism came out of the story. But she comes back with an olive branch. And olive branches, of course, make people of this time think of olive oil. The word for olive is zait. It comes from the word zuf, which means brightness. So we have the bubbling happiness of the dove brings back the brightness and richness of olive oil, or that possibility. They also blossom in the spring, by the way. So again, we're coming back to that spring motif. It's actually one of the words for the month of spring before the Jewish calendar adopted the Babylonian calendar when they were in exile. And so when we invest and try again and again for joy and community to take root, what will it bring back for us? But brightness and richness of springtime and olives. So hopefully that's something we can lean into this Sunday, looking for where are the hints of spring, what are our good signs of new life coming into being wherever we are at in our journey. And then if God is able to make space for our humanity, do we provide that same space for others and ourselves, right? That's the kind of people that we want to be, and the way that we heal the world and put it back together. So I'm going to pray on those two things. Lord, I thank you that these are the first stories that you wanted your people to know. When they first started hearing about the world, you wanted them to know that new life is always possible and is always coming. I pray that we would have eyes to see that, that we wouldn't believe the narratives that whatever suffering we're experiencing now is the way that it'll always be. That this aloneness down in our hidey holes of our arks is just the best that we can manage. Instead, I pray that we would have the courage, the tenacity, the force of will to say, no, I'm going to leave this ark, even though it's been cozy and I'm so thankful for it. I'm also going to journey out and follow God's call not to remain in this sanctuary space forever. I pray that as we go out, we would lean into not the worldview of scarcity, which tells us we need to be like the raven and be smart and be a loner and take what you can get, but that we would lean into the posture of the dove, of wine, of joyful community, of celebration, and use that as our tool for life, even when it doesn't take the first time. Lord, I pray that we would receive the richness and the joy and the brightness of olive oil through that experience. I pray that you would be with us in all these things and that you would work it out and give us the courage and the will and the spirit and the grace to engage in the same work with you and say yes to it. I ask all these things in your name, Jesus. Amen. Okay, Refuge Church, if this has been a great space for you, if you hang out with us or you'd like to, you can find the form to get the Zoom link on refugepullman.com. There's also a little button in the corner that says give, and there's one-time gift options, recurring gift options. We would so love and invite your support. Thank you to everyone who does tithe and who does give. You make all of this possible. Otherwise, I'd be, working, not having time. So thank you so much. All right, guys, have a great week. Bye.